Good morning, Mets fans, and welcome to a Monday edition of Drivin with Mr. Met. Today is Monday, January the 27th, and it is an RIP Kobe edition of Drivin with Mr. Met. I'm Mr. Met. Sad news yesterday with the unfortunate passing of Kobe Bryant and his daughter, among others, in a tragic helicopter crash in California. That's sort of shocked the whole world, not just the sports world, but just some sad news there, and I'll have to kick off the show with that. But this is a Mets-centric show, so I'm going to talk a little bit about some things with the Mets happened over the weekend, including the Mets FanFest, a free agent / minor league invite, and a couple of prospects that are worth talking about on today's show. But the good news is that my cold is getting better. So that's a positive, but just a really sad day yesterday for the sports world, for the world in general, and with the passing of 41-year-old Kobe Bryant. It's one of those things that makes you sort of recognize your own mortality. Kobe's my age. I mean, it's now look, I don't have the money to be flying around in helicopters, but still, there's a level of water to the face that kind of ties into that. It's like, just don't take every day for granted. It may well be your last, and live life to its fullest. Hug those that you love. Don't go to bed angry, etc., etc., etc. So just shitty news with Kobe's passing yesterday, especially in the wake of what happened on Saturday night, where LeBron James passed Kobe for third all time in the NBA's scoring list, and Kobe was at the game and on court hugging LeBron. It's just a really sad moment. And of course, we send our deepest sympathies to the family. So on to Mets talk now. Trying to shift gears a little bit. A couple weeks ago, I had mentioned that I'd heard on Ryan Finkelstein's Locked On Mets podcast that he dropped the name Brock Holt as a guy that the Mets should be looking at as a free agent acquisition, and I 1,000,000% agree. Brock Holt is the kind of player who can play multiple positions well, is a fairly decent hitter, and is just across the board just a great addition to a roster that could use as many utility players as possible. To that extent, now the Mets did not sign Brock Holt, but they did extend a minor league invite to Eduardo Nunez, utility position player, played most recently, I believe, with the Twins, came up with the Yankees about 10 years ago, bounces all over the diamond, I should say, played in San Francisco a few years ago, was on the Mets' radar as a potential free agent acquisition at one point in recent years, but for whatever reason, he's finally made his way to Queens now, or at least has been invited to make an audition to be in Queens. I'm on board with this. I think the more major league quality minor league invites you can extend, the better. There is a potential fit for Nunez on the major league roster because he is a utility infielder as well as an outfielder. So it'll be interesting to see how he performs in spring training and if he warrants an invite to the major league team, or if he accepts an assignment to AAA, which remains to be seen. I'm sure he has language in his agreement that he can opt out if he doesn't make the major league club, etc., etc. So I don't know. We'll see what happens with that situation. But again, very much like last year, where the Mets stockpiled outfielders in the form of Rajai Davis, among others, those guys did play did make a fairly significant contribution. Some of them at the major league level. So there's no reason why you shouldn't try to repeat that for 2020. So FanFest was this weekend at Citi Field, and of course I wasn't there, but it looked like an absolute blast. It looks like this was a 100% win for the Mets. Excuse me. A lot of players there interacting with fans, a lot of interviews, a lot of positive talk, a lot of positive Luis Rojas talk. I didn't come back on Friday and talk about the press conference or anything. I didn't feel there was a need to, honestly. And I still believe that, to be completely honest. There's nothing I said on Thursday and on Wednesday and before that still doesn't remain true today. And, the players really continue to back that up in their interviews, whether it would be at FanFest or with Andy Martino or whatever. Luis Rojas has been very well received by the players. The thing I will say about that, and tie this into the FanFest comments, is that I have a little concern, not a lot, but a little, that he's too friendly with the players. He being Luis Rojas. Can he be the disciplinarian that he may need to be as the manager? Can he separate? We're friends, but this is how it's going to be, and I'm the boss in dugout. Is that possible? That among his abilities to manage in game in the major leagues, to deal with the media, etc. The culture that he has built thus far in his minor league career and his brief big league career in the dugout as quality control coach for the Mets, can he build upon that and not have that sort of hinder his ability to run this team? That's a concern that I think is going to come up more and more, especially if we start seeing the media latch on to stories like favoritism and Robbie Cano's not hustling and Luis Rojas doesn't know how to discipline him. You can sort of see it right now. This is the way the media is going to spin a lot of this stuff. And, there may or may not be truth to it, but the reality is that Rojas can avoid that by being upfront with everybody, by making it abundantly clear that we're still friends, but my number one priority is team first, and sometimes we all have to make sacrifices for the team. Therefore, Robbie, you're going to have to sit today. Therefore, Tomas Nido, I know we're buds, but you're not a good catcher, and I'm sorry you're going to be starting the season in AAA. These are the sorts of things that I think we'll have to see how this unfolds, but it'll be important to see how Rojas handles that. To me, I think that's going to be one of his first challenges as big league skipper for the Mets. Speaking of minor leaguers, last but not least, I want to talk about the top 100 prospects list that was released this past weekend. The Mets have 4 representatives on the list. One is an old, a previous representative, and the other 3 are new to the list, I believe. The highest ranked is Ronnie Mauricio. Right behind him is Francisco Alvarez. The old flame on the list is, of course, Andres Jimenez, and making his debut on the list is last year's draft pick Brett Beatty. So interesting about this is that the Mets now have 4 guys in the top 100, and none of them are in the top 50. Let's be clear. So it's not like they have top tier top 100 talent, but they've still got 4 players in the top 100. That's above average, right? So the average for a team is 3. You do the math on that. That's what it is. It's 3. 1 or 2 teams will have 4, and of course it's not all averaged out. Some teams have terrible farm systems, have no one in the top 100. Others have more than 5. I think the Rays had 6, if I remember correctly. But the reality here is that for all of the flack that the Mets farm system gets, there are still some diamonds in there, and that's why I think I wanted to point out about the top 100, that the Mets have 4 guys there. And a couple of them are pretty close to making an impact, including that catcher, Francisco Alvarez, who has been talked up a lot this offseason. So there is truth in the fact that the Mets farm system isn't deep, but don't believe the rhetoric that the Mets farm system is utter trash, because it's not. Last year's draft went a long way to add some value to the system that was previously lacking in value, especially in the top tiers. But there are diamonds in this system. There are guys here that can contribute either for the Mets or as pieces in trades to build up the major league roster for the Mets right now. So I wanted to just bring that up because I think that's very important, and I think it's important again to when we hear the way that people on Mets Twitter and that the media will sometimes frame the debate around the Mets farm system. It's not completely accurate. So keep that in mind. And on that end, to be completely honest, I've been listening to Mike Silva's podcast, who, if you're not listening to him, he's a really good voice of the Mets, and I think he's pretty realistic and pretty, not to quote Fox News, but pretty fair and balanced. He's a straight shooter, and he's real honest about the way the media covers the Mets, and I enjoy the way he talks about it. I think he's spot on, and I'm going to suggest that you guys, if you're not already, I'm going to suggest that you subscribe to his podcast and listen to it. It's usually every Sunday that it comes out, but the point I'm making here is that the media has its own agenda, and now more than ever, they don't care so much about the facts. They care about clicks, they care about headlines, they care about clickbait, and that's what a lot of the quote-unquote reporting is these days with the media. And I just think it's worth listening to the way Mike breaks that down, and again, sort of tying back to taking things with a grain of salt. Do a little bit more research on stuff is my suggestion. Go out and look at multiple sources for things. Don't just believe what Mike Puma wants you to believe. You don't just believe what one guy is pushing. You know, get it from multiple places. The same can be said for Andy Martino, frankly, because a lot of this stuff, and a lot of this ties back to Brody's inability, or rather Brody's the tight-lipped nature of Brody's front office, which I think is a huge success, and it pisses the reporters off. So just take that with a grain of salt. Everything you read, do a little bit of research, and realize that just because the reporter's written about it doesn't mean it's completely true. So that was a tangent that I wasn't expecting to go on, but it is going to wrap it up for this morning. I'll be back at some point this week, more than likely tomorrow, because I'm going to be out of town the end of the week, and I won't be back until Saturday. So I'll probably come back with a show tomorrow to talk about Lord knows what. If I don't make it back, then who knows? I'll be back at some point. But before we know it, Pitchers and Catchers will be in Port St. Lucie, and I am super excited about that. So until whenever the next time is I come back, thanks for watching today. I appreciate it. You can follow me on Twitter if you're not already doing so at Mr_Met. And as always, let's go Mets.